Born to fight, built to lead. This is Presidents Unplugged, the show where we dive into our presidents for who they really were. This week's episode is about Teddy Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States. Who was Teddy Roosevelt? Let's start from the beginning. He was born in a wealthy New York family, and as a young child, he suffered with asthma, severe asthma. And at the time, in the late 1800s, they didn't know what to do with asthma. They just kind of secluded him from the rest of the children, which is an awful, awful thing to do. But it really did teach him to be tough and to fight through things. His father encouraged him to, even though he was at home all the time, to still fight and to still learn to be able to do things that other children can. So Teddy Roosevelt was basically homeschooled and did everything he knew at home, and he was very successful in that because after all of his childhood suffering, he actually was able to go to Harvard. And at Harvard, he was very lucky. He met his first wife, Alice Lee. The technique of how he met his wife was pretty interesting. Instead of charming her, he went to her family's events and charmed her family. He gave her siblings gifts. He did things for the parents, charming the lady's family. I guess that worked back then because it sure doesn't now. So, 4 years later, after Teddy Roosevelt graduated college, was the hardest day of Teddy Roosevelt's life. On February 14th, Valentine's Day of 1884, Teddy Roosevelt's mother and his wife both died on the same day. His mother died of typhoid fever, which was at the time a really devastating fever, similar to the flu, but they didn't really have a cure for typhoid fever, so it was pretty much a guaranteed death, which was extremely sad. And Teddy Roosevelt's wife had just had their first son 3 days ago, and she died from an unknown kidney disease caused by birthing her child incorrectly, which is an awful day for poor Teddy Roosevelt. He was troubled by this. He was absolutely wrecked by it. There's great videos out there of talking about his journal. He journaled every day, and his journal from that day described this day in particular as the hardest day in his life. So, in response to that, Teddy Roosevelt took his life to the west, or kind of north. He decided to go up to the Dakota Territory and become a cowboy, a cattle rancher. He did this to kind of cope with his troubles with home, and it really did work. He learned a lot up there. He learned a lot of environmental things that he would use during his presidency. So this idea of him going to the Dakotas, he has stated in many interviews that it was the reason that he wanted to become president or re-enter politics. So, in 1886, he came back to New York, his hometown, and he was right on it. He came right back into politics. He became the police commissioner in 1887, and he became the police commissioner of New York, which that was a really high up position, but it wasn't a position that did a ton. Like, the people knew who it was, but they didn't know what he did really. Teddy Roosevelt was not dealing with that. He went tough on reform and corruption. He found any difficulties and fought them. He found troubles and he fixed them. And he was really good on finding things that were wrong and fixing them, because he had said that many people who have been in the position in the past had missed things that he found and then broke. This would come up later during his presidency. He was known as the trust buster for the reason that he found falsehoods and fought them head on. And that was a really, not even a bold thing, but just an incredible move from him to find what's wrong in the world and fix it. So after he became the police commissioner, the Spanish-American War started in 1898, and Teddy Roosevelt was very active in this war. Him and a bunch of other people around New York joined to form a group called the Rough Riders. Now, the bad thing about this time is that all these fighting groups, were normally white men who fought in the wars, and that's all it was. But the Rough Riders were unique because they were different types of people. There were Mexican Americans, there were African Americans, there were lots of different kinds of people. And that really showed Teddy Roosevelt saying, it doesn't matter of the color of your skin, it matters your heart. And these people fought. They fought hard. And on July 1st, 1898, they fought with strenuous spirit and valor in their most valuable and honestly the most memorable war moment of Teddy Roosevelt, in my opinion. They charged up San Juan Hill. Okay, let me put this into perspective. It was a big hill that if they could conquer this hill in San Juan, they would have the high ground to capture the area of Santiago, which was a big city that if they could capture, they could force a surrender from the Spanish government. So after Teddy Roosevelt rode up San Juan Hill, he rode up in his horse that is now famous. Teddy Roosevelt on a horse is a big deal. Him and Ronald Reagan are the two presidents that we mostly see on a horse, maybe George Washington, but Teddy Roosevelt, he went a lot of places on a horse, and this was a big part of his cattle ranching days, showing off in his war techniques. So them charging up San Juan Hill was very important because it led to the surrender, and it led to the Americans winning in the Spanish-American War, which ended in around 1900. So when he came back, he was determined. He was like, I am going to do great things, and I can be a politician, because he knew from being the police commissioner that he can do great things in politics. So in 1900, he became the governor of New York. Yet again, as he did with the commissioner's office, he really wanted reform and change in the governing position. And he was a very good governor of New York. He was actually one of the best, simply for breaking down, being again a trust buster, breaking down lies and falsehoods and really showing his determination by fighting through things and really working things out. So McKinley, William McKinley, the 25th president of the United States, he had a vice president that he elected in 1896. His name was Garrett Hobart. He was a great VP in a lot of ways, but he sadly passed away a month after McKinley's term, so he had to get a new vice president. So McKinley, hearing the great things about Mr. Roosevelt, asked Teddy Roosevelt to be his VP in the election of 1900, and Teddy Roosevelt was very excited. He became McKinley's VP candidate in 1900, and they won in pretty much a landslide. McKinley was liked because he did a lot of great things with the Spanish-American War, and now with Teddy Roosevelt on his team, they were unstoppable. So McKinley, sadly, at the Pan American Convention in Buffalo, New York, was assassinated by Leon Czolgosz. Look up how to spell that name. It's quite interesting. McKinley being assassinated, it's scary to think about it, but there was a time in our history where being a president was a very high likelihood of death or being shot. And McKinley was kind of like our country saying, oh gosh, this is not good, y'all. And even though McKinley didn't really push anything CIA-wise like other presidents would after their assassinations, his assassination was sad. And it made Teddy Roosevelt our 26th president of the United States. This is probably one of the most known facts about Teddy Roosevelt. He was our youngest president that we ever had at 42 years old. But now let me put this straight. John F. Kennedy was our youngest president elected. He went to the electors. People voted him in as the youngest president ever at 43 years old. Teddy Roosevelt was not elected. He became president after McKinley's assassination. So Teddy Roosevelt is our youngest president, but he was not our youngest president elected. That reign still goes to John F. Kennedy at 43 years old. So let's talk about the Teddy Roosevelt years of the presidency. So he actually introduced a square deal and yet again, more reform in his first term. He did a lot of fighting for the people in his term. And the big thing that happened out of the square deal, it was basically saying, big companies, you're not going to scam the American people just because you're wealthy. That's wrong. And he did a lot of things, especially with companies like Standard Oil, which were the biggest companies in the United States at the time. And he really shut the wrongdoings of them down, which really helped the American people in the end because it made them feel important, just like these big wealthy people above them. So after the company fighting, he also introduced the Panama Canal, connecting the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean together, and he administered a lot of trade between foreign countries with the Panama Canal. Now, let me just say why the Panama Canal is so important. The Panama Canal is so important to us today because it's a big trade route. Other than the Erie Canal, it's one of the biggest trade routes in the country. And the Panama Canal was administered by Teddy Roosevelt. Now, some presidents have said, okay, we're going to build this, but I'm not really going to look at it. I'm just going to kind of let it work and let the people die working on it, and just they can do it. They got this. Teddy Roosevelt actually went to Panama in multiple scenarios and watched it being built. And this is one of the most incredible parts of the Panama Canal. The fact that it was so efficient. They spent about $300 million on it, which, y'all, that's a lot of money, but for the government, for a project such as that connected two major oceans, that was especially efficient, economically wise then, and it still is a pretty incredible feat today. After the success of the Panama Canal and all his things with the square deal, he was reelected pretty heavily, and his second term, he spent a lot of time talking about conservation. He actually is the reason why we have a lot of our national parks. He doubled the amount of national parks we had during his terms, and most all of these national parks are still available for us to enjoy today. He really thought that America would be a place of beauty as well as a place of business and everything else. He wanted Americans to really enjoy the beauties of America, and looking at some mountains or looking at some parks is a good way to enjoy the beauty of America. He had a bunch of notable quotes during his presidency terms, and the big one that everybody knows is "Speak softly and carry a big stick." Now, this is a really good motive to look at his presidency and his person, who he was, because speaking softly is what Roosevelt did. He didn't want to make fights. He liked war, but he didn't think it was necessary always. You can speak softly, and you can do great things by speaking softly. But carry a big stick. Still have your ideals in check. Still have your techniques in check, because if it comes to it, we have the power. We can win, but try to speak softly and be approachable, and know your way to communicate softly and be extremely nice to the people against you before we have to carry and possibly use the big stick. So I'm going to go quickly into after his presidential terms real quick. In 1908, after his 2 presidential terms, he left office. The 22nd Amendment, saying that you couldn't have 3 terms after FDR, wasn't established yet, so he could have run for a 3rd term. But he said, I'm telling you, y'all can vote for William Howard Taft. I really approve him. So William Howard Taft became the 27th president. But then Taft had his presidency, and Teddy Roosevelt did not like a lot of the things that he did in his presidency. He really just did not like a lot of his ideas. So Teddy Roosevelt's like, okay, I'm going to run again in 1912. So he did. He didn't run as a Republican. He ran as the Bull Moose Party, which, if you don't know, a bull moose is a massive animal that is extremely threatening in the wild. So that's what Roosevelt used as a representation of his presidency. Another thing that would have come up if he would have been elected in 1912 would be more conservation, more national parks, and more overall country-saving ideas, nature, etc. So in 1912, there was actually 3 major candidates: William Howard Taft, Teddy Roosevelt, and Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson had a rough presidency, but at the time he said, I'm going to fight for women's rights and lots of great things. Woodrow Wilson, he had some good ideas. So there were 3 candidates: Taft, Roosevelt, and Wilson. The events of this election, Teddy Roosevelt and Taft split the Republican Party. Taft actually got less votes than Roosevelt did, and Roosevelt ran as a third-party candidate, and to this day, Roosevelt on this election has the most votes of any third-party candidate. He's not even really close to anybody else. The closest we've had since then is Ross Perot with about 12%, but Roosevelt got 27.3% of the vote, which that's incredible for a third-party vote. He didn't win. Woodrow Wilson won because of the split of the party, but overall, it was a great attempt, and it really showed Roosevelt's fight for the American people, and he really wanted the best for the Americas. So after he lost in 1912, he accepted that his political journey might maybe be over. So he was like, okay, I'm going to travel some. So he went to South America. He traveled the Amazon. He also almost died in his trips to go see the Amazon, and he also went to Africa one time to get materials for the Smithsonian Museum. Y'all, this is incredible. He did lots of things that no president would even think of doing today. He really went out of his way to do great things for the American people and made himself not look like a president who needs to sit in a lounge for the rest of his life. He's going to go fight, and he's going to go do incredible things. Because he was president does not mean he can't explore the world. But the sad thing is, it was a lot on him. These trips to Africa and South America put a lot of stress on his body, and on January 6, 1919, he died in his sleep. Roosevelt, I'm going to summarize this. He was a fighter. He made the presidency what it is today. He didn't want the president to just be some person that is written on the newspaper and that's it. He wanted the president to be somebody that the people loved, the people could trust, and the people overall can just look at and say, that's my president. Woodrow Wilson, the president at the time of Teddy Roosevelt's death, he had a vice president named Thomas R. Marshall, a great vice president, by the way, who said this quote about Teddy Roosevelt: "Death had to take him sleeping, for if he had been awake, there would have been a fight." Teddy Roosevelt was a fighter. He fought for what was right, and he fought for the people. And that's what made him such a memorable and such an amazing piece of the American story. Tune in next Friday at 1 p.m. where we're going to talk about a more recent president, but one with a truly touching story that goes out to the masses, Jimmy Earl Carter. I will see you next week. This is Presidents Unplugged, and I'll see you soon. God bless.